All right, everyone, welcome. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and it is our goal every week to bring you stories of innovation, education, and entrepreneurship, or anything that we think might.
I think what he's trying to say is anything that might be of interest. And today we hit quite a few of those points because we're talking about technology and education. And I've got an opportunity to share something that I think will be really interesting for you. And I just hope I can share this personal story, but hope that it's got something for everybody that's going. So I've called this presentation, Creating Bliss for Students. And it is exactly what it says on the process. In my first year of teaching, we were handed down a missive that our special needs kids wasn't responding to detentions. And so they decided to hand out the one punishment that they thought would make a difference. They were going to ban him from the lunchtime computer club. As you can imagine, this did not go quite according to plan. What actually happened was SLT chased him down the line. I, as a new teacher, said, "I'm really sorry, you can't come in." And he did the one thing you'd expect him to do, pushed his way straight past me. For him, it was all about this Pac-Man game he was making. He loved this Pac-Man game. He had control of the environment and everything that happened in it. So he was delighted to be able to do this. He liked this world. It was his escape. I guess in some ways this was a success. Eventually SLT conceded that on his individual education plan, IT could help. In my second school, I really thought I'd smartened up. So when I was told that there was going to be a special meeting about, let's call him Robert for the sake of argument, I thought to myself, I better talk about stretch and challenge. And, you know, all the ways I was really gonna take things in. And so, you know, I get to the meeting and I'm told to myself, right, okay, here we go. I go first with a name like Mr. Abela. I generally went first in these things and told them about all these plans for gifted and talented. And my head teacher quite kindly turned around and said, "Well, that's splendid for you, James. It really is. But that's not what this meeting is about." Suffice it to say, the rest of the staff had a catalogue of problems with him. However, in IT, he loved the problem solving. And again, it was an escape from a friendless world. The third student, let's call him Barry, I actually only met once. I was running a scratch day in St. John's in Cambridge, and we were going through the event. Everybody was having a good time. People actually traveled quite far to be there, so I was really, really happy. But it was only during the break when Barry's parents came up to me, and they said to me, "We're so incredibly grateful for this experience." He said, "It's the first time he's ever wanted to go anywhere." And he said, furthermore, it's the first time he's ever agreed to speak in public. It was an incredible moment for me, and it really made me realize how important it is that we, you know, offer coding and computational thinking. Because this kid was bullied, incredibly introverted, and it was the only thing he loved. And through coding, he'd found friends and a purpose. I think it's this escapism that speaks to me. You know, it is one of those situations where we have these issues, and I've read quite a lot on the matter, and it really does talk to these things. And I think also when I was a kid, I was in that horrible situation where I was bottom of the class, so the teachers didn't want me around, and I was being bullied. And I was being bashed literally against the school building. And then I was being told off for playing dangerous games. So I was being punished again. Yeah, I'm not going to say I had a terrible childhood, but it wasn't until much later that I realized it isn't a normal exercise to put your head under the water until that point where you have, you know, your brain instinctively forces you to pull it up. I mean, and I'm sure a lot of teenagers are going through these issues. And I do think that programming is the way that I can share with my students to really make things better. Because I do think that teachers can create classrooms that are actually sanctuaries where people, you know, the students want to be. You don't give them a detention because you know they'd play up for it. What I do think is that computers and coding can almost provide an extra layer to that. Because when students are fully engaged, it becomes their own little world where students have godlike powers to shape that world, you know. However, for students to find their bliss in this world, there is a wall to climb. The joy of coding is that it's a fully consistent world. You get the same result every time. But it's a world where, let's just say, an extra bracket ain't forgiven. That's going to stop a program in its tracks. This challenge brings great joy when you finally debug that code, but also great frustration when you can't find that error. And unfortunately, many teachers fall for the problem of either creating steps that are way too small, and I've seen this on online programs where they've gone for the bottom, you know, the absolute bottom denominator where everything is step by step. Well, of course, that leads to absolute boredom. Or the absolute opposite, which is when they make it like Mount Everest. And that really is a huge problem. So getting that actual state of flow is really about finding that perfect middle ground. And it's something that teachers are constantly adjusting, because not only is it different, it's different for every student, and what works for one student doesn't work for another. But the paybacks for learning coding really only start with escapism. I've been discussing this talk with quite a lot of people. One of them, Lee, said, you know, don't be talking so much about escapism, talk about empowerment. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that, you know, these incredibly shy students are really coming out of their shell. I mean, I had one student who was not quite a selective mute, but was pretty close. And it was a big deal. And it was, by the time he was in year 13, he actually went across the city and led a coding team. And his parents said that's the first time he's ever wanted to go across the city, go somewhere completely new and take this on. Another shy student wanted to help the Rohingya refugees, which are in Kuala Lumpur at the moment, fleeing from their own country. And he realized that even basic computing skills would help. And this safety blanket of being about computer science really helped him to make a huge difference to these kids and make them much more employable. Some of my top coders have talked on Kuala Lumpur's educational podcast. And in this case, again, teachers came back to me afterwards and they said, this is really the first time that I actually heard her voice. The other less tangible benefit is that coders are really problem solvers. In Malaysia, we do have a real issue. Right now, I know that the headlines are being grabbed by the Amazon. Really, really sadly, I've got to tell you, it's not the only rainforest that's getting burnt right now. Indonesia, there's a lot of burning going on. And it's creating real problems in Kuala Lumpur in terms of air pollution. So what the students are doing is they're getting some Raspberry Pis, which you might have heard of, little tiny computers, wiring them up with some CO2 sensors. I think they do need to use Arduinos with this to help. And then actually getting all this data together. And what they're really trying to do is not only make it so that it measures the data, but also they're trying to work out based on wind direction and things like that, whether they can start to predict this pollution. They're making good progress. We're not quite there yet, but it's definitely working. And I think one of the key things is that students are often empowered by these challenges. One of the challenges that I set for my students was based on a film called The Maze Runner. And in The Maze Runner, this maze changes every night. So I thought, yeah, they'll make a little maze game. They'll play with a bit of turtle. And I thought it was a great introduction. What I didn't quite bargain for was an absolute literal translation where the maze literally changed every single time you ran it. And I put this challenge out to my friends in Southeast Asia and to the other teachers. And so far, nobody's solved it. Well, it was an impossible challenge, and I'm supposed to be the teacher. I absolutely had to solve it. Bliss. So that's my little talk, and opening it up for questions now. Rushton, you're back on. Fantastic.
There was kind of this moment of like, this doesn't seem to be working. And then it was like, oh, we got the presentation going. And I think I heard 95% of it. So, and it's great to hear the story again. James, thank you very much for joining us. Let's also meet the other folks who are on the call as well. We have the president, the president, the committee chair, the fearless leader of our programs team, Roger Plested in Kamloops, Canada. Yay, Roger. And then we also have Shags Shagrin in the San Francisco Bay Area. Shags, good to have. Also known as the Paella Master. And so what we'll do, James, I want to start by just saying that, when we talk about coding being something that can really reach kids, you hear a lot about coding across the curriculum, coding the code. Do you see coding as something that is for absolutely everybody and should be a piece of the core curriculum?
I think now this is where I would divide up computational thinking and coding. I think the ability to think and solve problems, absolutely everybody should do it. I think the key thing about coding is that with the right language like Scratch, it gives you the tools to enable you to do that computational thinking. Will everybody need to code in the future? Probably not. Does everybody need to solve problems? Yeah. I mean, from the basic problem of how do I organize my wardrobe in a minute, so, to other issues that are going on. So yeah, I do think that being able to solve problems in a computational way is important. Given how much we do on the computer, I think understanding those principles of how computers work is also incredibly important. And again, everybody should do it, because the jobs that are growing are obviously the ones in tech.
Well, and I think you spoke to it really well when you were talking about the difference between a curriculum that is plodding along and is boring for everyone versus something that can be quite engaging. And you can teach the fundamental principles of something without it being the kind of slog where it's so simple that people are falling back in their chairs and drool running out of their mouth or whatever it may be. So Roger and Shags, you may have a question or a comment. I want to make sure that we do that as well.
Not a question, just a comment. I really commend you on what you've done.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
For all the people who have been bullied in school.
I think that's why I can personally relate so much. Yeah. Roger?
From the perspective of classifying students as being introverts or extroverts, one of the things that I found is that even though that society holds up the extrovert, it's actually the introvert who has and develops quicker the problem-solving abilities, which will look at a problem and tend to think it through to solve actually the problem. That's one of the things that I've found, and I've from the comments of Shags, I take from that he was a bit of an introvert when he was growing up. I know that I was, and it seems like you, James, were the same.
Yes, I definitely know my friends from school would say that they don't recognize me these days. I've certainly grown a lot and become much more confident. But in school, I was the grey man. I was completely invisible. And in secondary, a lot of my problems were gone. And I was pretty much invisible.
Yeah, and I think that's because from the school, it's the prime example. It should be the extrovert, and everybody should be extrovert type of attitude. And as a result, the introvert tends to get shoveled in the background. I know personally, and the experiences that I've had, particularly with kids coming through the system and hiring secretaries for my office, and I can remember one example in particular for one girl, and she came into my office and she says, "I don't know how to do this." And I said to her, "Well, you're going to have to learn." And she said, "Well, they didn't teach this in school."
I think that's one of the big problems we got. I think
And my response to her, well, this isn't school. So you go out, you sit down, you figure it out. If after you spent some time figuring it out, if you have a further problem, come and see me.
Mm-hmm.
Don't bother me when you haven't tried to solve the problem yourself.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think a lot of curriculums are far too much spoon feeding. And it's a problem that's a knowledge in education that we spoon feed far too much. Universities don't spoon feed these days so much. But yeah, I mean, everybody says you ain't met, if you think your teacher's tough, wait till you meet a boss. I think that's Bill Gates who said that. And I think he had it spot on.
Exactly.
One of the things that we can look at with that is the nature of how people move from wherever they might be, introvert, extrovert,
Yes.
to having a certain motivation to take a lead in something. And you talk
Yes.
about that passionately with the kids, being willing to try something in their community, to lead a thing. But you too have taken a bit of a lead in developing some programs across Southeast Asia where you've tried to get people together. Can you talk a little bit about the groups and the competition they run and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what I realized was when I reached Southeast Asia, there was no connective network. Now, before I'd been participating in something called CAS in the UK, and I initially wanted to run CAS in Southeast Asia, but because the government was funding the UK program, they couldn't support us internationally. And so then I thought, well, basically all we need is a connection and just a basic piece of software and things like that. So I said, you know what, let's get a few people together. And it started with about 5 or 6 of us. And now we've got 75 schools involved and 80 odd teachers. And most of them are lone wolves in their own school. So it's a really amazing opportunity to connect with each other. And it's nice to be using social networking for good. We're getting at the position now within Kuala Lumpur that we regularly have schools come together for a competition. There's a competition on 28th of September. And those students are now starting to lead those competitions. Again, I think the computer science almost provides that safety blanket that they're confident in computer science. And we do an incredible job of getting students from liking the subject, enjoying the subject, leading all that way up to advocacy. And, it's amazing how in year 12 and 13, those students are really advocating for the subject and telling those students below them, you've got to do it, you've got to make the effort, have a real go. It's amazing. So, and even within the school, we've built it from a school where I get like one class to where now we've got over half the year studying computer science, certainly at 14 to 16. And the numbers are looking really good to A-levels. And once they've tasted it in GCSE, we get good numbers, about half again, stick with it in A-levels. But then from A-level, nearly most students do something computer science related in terms of their degree.
Fantastic.
So numbers are looking great.
Could you describe, the kind of challenges that students face in the competitions that the group runs? So like if
yeah, absolutely. So for example, the challenges could be as simple as draw a rectangle using this little program called Turtle, up to making things like chatbots. We, as a school, have made a decision to largely stick with Python, but the new competition will allow Python, Java, Swift, and Visual Basic snuck in there. I don't know if anybody's going to code in Visual Basic, but it's still around, and apparently it's still it's quite popular on Windows because it's a relatively easy way to make a GUI, and it's built in pretty deep. I'm sure some of you who are proper geeks probably got into Excel and said, you know what, that Excel formula ain't doing quite what I like. Right, let's go in the VB and make it do something a bit more.
Nice. Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to wind us down.
Sure.
And then before I finish, though, I'll hand it back to you for a final comment. Just any particular piece of wisdom or encouragement you have for the people watching the recording will certainly be welcome. To all of our viewers, our members and our guests, remember there are a couple of things that we're looking for you to do. The first is to let us know you were here. If you scroll down a little bit farther on the page that is this week's meeting, find the attendance piece, and that is just a simple form that you fill out. If you are joining us from another club, that also means that you when you successfully put in your email address, you'll get a note back, which will generate the kind of thing you need to show your club secretary in order to make up a missed meeting at your own club. A little farther down from there, you'll see the discuss section, ASQUS, and our hope there is that you'll leave some comments. Leave some comments for James. You may have an experience related to computer science education or something similar that you want for him to be able to see, you want for the other members of our club to be able to work with and respond to, perhaps. But that space is there for us to be able to share ideas. So please do that as well. Thank you again to Roger and Shags for joining the recording. Thank you to all of us for all of the group who are joining in on our meeting. And to finish this off, I'd like to hand it back to James. James, share your last thought before we finish up.
I think the thought is always the same. If you have great relationships with your students, regardless of your subject, I've given a good example for computer science, then you have an amazing opportunity to teach those students. If you are not a teacher, but you are involved in computing is an incredibly engaging, life-changing code to teach. So please, if you've got the try and join in the code clubs, or even just make some tutorials or something, anything you can do to give to the community. And if you absolutely hate people and there's no way you would sign up for any of this, then please always contribute in open source when you can, because that's how we all get better. Thank you very much.